So we're out here in our experimental nightshade field. This is an investigation of the suitability of some crops to our climate, but also like our methods that we're going to use as we scale this out. So at the beginning of the year, none of this was here actually. This was just grass. And so the fence is new, the the rows are new, and the plants are new. So this is a physalis, and this is another variety of physalis. They're nightshades related to tomatoes, but they produce a fruit that's sweet. So just investigating those as a possibility here. They've had some success in continental Europe with them, despite the fact that these are South American plants. So they seem to be pretty adaptable. But tomatoes are kind of the big story here. We spoke with some of our friends at the food bank about what was desired and what works here, because there's a lot of folks who have a really deep knowledge of growing things in this climate, in this context. And we got the recommendation for these folks over here, which are a yellow cherry tomato. And we got that from the Saltwater Seed Company, which is a seed company in the area that's developing varieties specifically for this peninsula. Planted them out in these raised beds. These raised beds are just material that was taken out of drainage ditches that have been dug all around the property for various reasons. Folks very laboriously hauled them over here and piled them up into this, and then we added compost and we added straw mulch and whatnot, and just built up this organic matter. And that's really important because we're actually standing at the lowest point of the property. There's a tremendous amount of pooling when it's wet here in this specific area. And so planting directly into this soil would have been planting into an area that's going to end up being very anaerobic. It's going to be really hard on the roots of the plants. But if we can lift the root zone up a little bit, we have the potential then that those roots can go down, find the water table. They can drink all that they want. They don't need to be irrigated especially heavily. And we can make use of a space that otherwise, at the start of the year, looked like a swamp. So that's what's going on there. It seems to be going pretty well. It is an experiment, but these folks are fruiting. All of these tomatoes have fruits on. I've just gone through and kind of topped their growing tips just to say, like, hey, buddy, it's time to ripen the fruit, stop growing. These are indeterminate tomatoes. They'll just keep going forever. And it's an experiment in sort of what is the minimum of effort that we can put into it and still get a usable yield out of the plants, because these are being grown in the open. They have a lot of access to aerobic compost, so they have a really healthy soil environment around them. And tomatoes are pretty vigorous plants. So when you look at the recommendations that so often are given for tomatoes, it's for growing in a hothouse environment where you're maybe growing somewhere that the climate isn't actually what that tomato wants, but you have a variety that you're particularly invested in growing and you have a particular yield that you want. So you're growing in a controlled environment. They're not getting full sunlight, because as soon as you grow something behind plastic or glass, you're cutting out the ultraviolet exposure. And for plants, that works the same way that it works for people. You know, if you don't get any UV exposure, you become vitamin D deficient, your immune system stops working nearly as well, you get depressed, all of these things. Plants have the same experience, so they can't produce their secondary metabolites that they use to fight off pests and whatnot. So when you're growing a tomato in that environment, you have to cut all of its lower branches off to make sure that you have good airflow so that you don't have molds and fungal pests and whatnot. And you have to be very vigilant about, you know, are there aphids in here? Are there all of these different things? Because the plant can't defend itself. But out here, these plants are exposed to everything, good and bad. They're getting full sunlight. They have a rich soil food web underneath them that they can draw from. And so, you know, this is growing incredibly densely, no pruning at all of the lower leaves, no removal of suckers, no pruning at all for any of these plants other than an hour ago when I went along and topped a bunch of them just to try to get them to ripen instead of growing more. And we don't have any problems with disease, even deep in the jungle back here that I can't access anymore. I poke in here and I'm looking, and it's like some yellowing of leaves where you have clearly a leaf that's no longer getting any sun exposure because it's so heavily shaded. So we can see that kind of over here. I'll grab one of these leaves. And so, you know, the plant is pulling the chlorophyll out of this because it's not doing anything. So there's no point in it keeping this stocked up with chlorophyll. But this leaf tissue is not decaying, it's not unhealthy, it doesn't have a disease or anything like that. It's just not useful anymore. So the plant is just dying it back. See a little bit of that over here, right? Where we have this like really clear line where the plant has clearly made the determination that on this side of the stalk it wasn't doing so great, and on this side of the stalk maybe it was a little more exposed to sunlight. But they're healthy, which is not the experience that a lot of people have with tomatoes. And they're producing quite a lot of fruit with almost no effort. You know, they got planted, they got put in the ground, they got watered really a few times in total. The last time I watered these was 3 weeks ago. No sign of water stress, and we've had 85 degrees in sun every day except for last night we got some rain. So it seems to be working out, which is it's really nice to see. It truly was an experiment at the start of the year. It was this going to work? Who knows? But it's not that much effort to actually ask the question, and sometimes you get a really nice reply.
That was a spiritual question.
Yeah, totally.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
Coming
So-
this way?
Yeah, let's go. Well, I'd like to go this way because I think it's a little,
Like fireworks.
there. Yeah.
I'm so excited. I cannot wait for these to drop some of these fruits on
Yeah.
That was thereabouts.
Highly educational, Brian. Much appreciation for the outline.
Always one that I miss.
And so the little blossoms on them, you don't want to take those off.
At this point, I do, because they'll just try to make new fruits instead of ripening the fruits that they already have. Like these plants all have fruits on them. If you
Oh,
dig
yeah.
around in there.
Oh, God, yeah.
And
Oh,
so
yeah. I mean, you can, I can see them.
yeah, and so it's just a matter of like, hey, you don't need, you have
Don't grow anymore.